Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be covering the mid-season changes, patch 14.10. But more specifically, we're going to be covering these changes through the lens of a top laner. So I'm going to be going through only the changes that impact top lane and talking you through how they benefit or negatively impact us and the champions we like to play. Hey everyone, if you're passionate about improving and leveling up your gameplay, I've been offering coaching classes for 5 days a week for quite some time, and just seen firsthand how much my students have been improving across all different elo brackets. How it works is you'll come to a class with a VOD like reviewed, and I'm going to help you with your early game, your mid game, or anything you feel like needs improving. And if you're unsure, then I'm going to steer you in the right direction by setting clear learning objectives. Link's going to be in the description, I hope to see you there, but if not, then enjoy the video. Now we're going to be starting with the champions because the system changes are just benefits to jungle and bot lane, we don't get any love, and I'm going to be skipping Corki because hopefully none of you are playing Corki in the top lane, so we're going to be starting with Cassante. This Cho'Gath change is just for jungle. Now the issue I have with this Cassante change, it is a nice little buff, I would say, but Cassante is exceptionally powerful in high ranks. He's really good in Master Plus, maybe even D2, D1 if you feel good on the champion, but other than that, I would stay away from him. Even though he did get a buff here, he's not really worth it, in my opinion, in playing in D4 or below games, because the amount of effort it takes to get your champion mastery to a level where this champion is worthwhile, it's just not worth the payoff. He's not even going to have as much carry potential in those brackets compared to, getting that good on a champ like Jax, or a champ like Fiora or Kimmel, of course. And I'm not saying every champ you play needs to have high carry potential, but there are tanks that are going to fulfill his job that take a lot less commitment to get to that level of mastery. He's so difficult to get the most out of your champion, and if you're not already at a high elo level, D1 plus, it's going to be really hard for you to do so. Now, in terms of the buff, I would say the issue I have with it is they say here, we're buffing E rank since a lot of Cassante players choose to max it second. Now, hopefully, you guys watching this aren't maxing that second. I strongly recommend maxing W second because it's just not as powerful. The W max cooldown reduction and the damage you get is going to be much more beneficial than the E rank extra shielding, even after you're getting 40 extra at max rank. So it's not worth maxing a second, which means this buff really only benefits you late game, level 14 onwards. So definitely not enough for you to add Cassante to your pool if it's something you're on the fence on, unless you're already a high rank player looking to master this champion. Now, as for the rest of the champ set, this changes just for jungle. And as for Skarner, this champion is really in a good spot, I would say, for top lane. Maybe low S tier, high A tier. He's a really strong champ. He's played in high low brackets as well, even in Korea. And the issue I have with this change is, I guess I just want more time to see where he lands. But he's such a powerful champion at the moment, and this is kind of a buff, kind of a nerf. Where in terms of the Q nerf, if you actually read it, 1% bonus HP damage difference on his Q and 2% on his E. You're not going to feel that in the early game. Maybe later on when you have 3,000 HP, it's going to matter slightly, but it doesn't really change how his champ functions in the game, and mana cost on Q being lower feels a lot better, damage to structures. So in terms of top lane, I'd say this is a bit of a buff, and the biggest benefit to this change I'd say he's receiving is the way his ulti works, because in my opinion, as someone that's versed a lot of Skarner recently, it's very, very easy to dodge his ulti. If he's not stunning you into the wall with his E, and you're thinking about his ulti very clearly and trying to avoid it, it's really hard for him to hit up. The windup is so long, but now they've made it. Of course, cast time is shorter, and also he can chain it while using other spells. So it's a lot easier for him to hit you with the spell because he can chain it together. He's not just standing there very obviously ulting you, and you can sidestep it while you see the windup. And in my opinion, this champion is the new Cassante, where because Cassante's received so many nerfs, you can't Q3 flash, you can't quickly tap your W. He's not the king of insecking you under the tower anymore. Skarner is, because if you get tagged by his E and just stunned to the wall into ulti, or even now maybe he just quick scopes you with ulti and then ease you after, really easy for him to kill you under tower. So this champion is so powerful in top lane. So I'm not a fan of this change, just some quality of life stuff for him, but I guess I need more time to see where he settles. Now as for Tryndamere, he's going to really feel the removal of lethal tempo, and we'll touch on it a bit more later, but in my opinion, this little 10% crit buff is not enough to make up for him losing a really powerful rune on this champion. Now, Tryndamere is a little bit flexible. You can still take Grasp in certain matchups, but there are a lot of lanes where you want lethal tempo, you want that all-in potential, and not having it, the 10% crit he's getting now, is not going to make up for that loss. Now moving down to Viego. So I'm quite excited for this change. I'm really excited to test out this champion, and I'm going to be making a tier list in the next coming days on this patch once I've really figured it out. But in my opinion, he's going to have room to be played in solo lane, because if you ever versed Viego, sorry, when he first came out, he was very powerful in lane. He had a lot of room to poke, he had a lot of sustain, and if you actually test out this new change to healing. He heals around between 28 and 31 per auto attack in the early game. If you have D-Blade, you can get about 30 HP back from an auto attack. So if you queue the entire wave, 5 or 6 creeps, you can get so much HP back. So I think he has a lot of room as a solo laner. And especially with the extra sustain, he might actually be quite a bit of a lane bully in certain matchups. Now, as for Yone and Yasuo, these two are really going to feel the lethal tempo nerf. I think they're going to be way weaker. I've always put Yone quite high in my tier list. I think this champion is very powerful, but not anymore. I'd say he's a bit of an average champion now, and he's definitely going to get a buff to compensate for his lack of lethal tempo. You can take Fleet and stuff, but Fleet Yone top not very threatening, very low all-in threat, and you can still play this champ if you have a lot of mastery onto him and make him work, but you are definitely going to miss out on a lot of kill windows that you would have had on the previous patch. And as for Yasuo, in my opinion, for top lane, he's only should be used as a counter pick anyway, but he is going to miss the lethal tempo. I'd say I don't recommend ever having this champ in your pool as top lane, but especially now that lethal tempo is removed, even though he gets a little bit of a buff here, not going to make up for it. So we'll move down to items, and because we don't like supports here, we're just going to skip all of those. We're going to get started on the Warmogs. Now, I like this change because on the previous patch, Warmogs was a pretty terrible item, and now you can actually build it as a second item. So when you're playing strong HP stacking champions, like Dr. Mundo, you can go Heartsteel into Warmogs, and it'll be really good for in games where you verse a lot of pokes. So if you verse champs like Xerath, champs like Hui, champs like Poking Kai'Sa, this can be a great second item. I do warn you not to build this item as a replacement to a key tank item you want, specifically magic resist. So for example, you're playing Mundo, let's say you're verse an AD top, let's say you're verse a Olaf or something, right? So you go Heartsteel and you go Ninja Tabs, even though you'd go Swifties in that matchup, let's just say you have Tabs, and they have double AP mid jungle. They have Lilia jungle, they have Hui mid. You don't want to be building Warmogs and trying to regen that because you are going to get one shot. You definitely need to get MR in that scenario, so make sure you're not building Warmogs as a replacement to a key resistant item that you need. Now, as for Fimble and Winters, I'm not a fan of these items. I think they're quite terrible in my opinion. There were some cheese builds at the start of the season that everyone was hyping up, Ingenious Hunter Volley or, Nessus, but that died off pretty quick. I'd say these items are just not that strong, even with Ingenious Hunter making them more effective. And even though you get an extra Ruby Crystal now, I think the lack of Ingenious Hunter are going to make these items quite bad. I can maybe see it on, still those champs we talked about, but maybe even a tank Gragas build where you build a lot of mana. But the only mana tank item you can really build is Frozen Heart, so I'd say in general these items should be stayed away from. And as for these items, I really like these changes to the Barmy's Holy Radiant Sunfire because it's quite hard as a tank in a lot of hard matchups to get to 1,000 gold on your first recall. So you have Doran Shield and you base and you have to go Ruby Cloth or Double Ruby. Feels quite terrible. But being able to get your Barmy Cinder at a 900 gold buy feels very good, and especially at giving haste. Now, a big benefit to this change, I would say, is the completed item, where you get 10 haste now instead of a 150 HP, where when you spike one item on a tank, you're pretty much unkillable in that game. Though one item AD carry or one item mid is going to deal with you, of course if they're really accelerated they can, but you're basically a beast and 150 HP is not going to change that. But having extra ability haste is going to give you a lot more combat power and a lot more room to trade in lane, so this change is really going to benefit tanks, especially Zac. Zac is going to get a huge buff from this, I would say, because he can also get haste from his runes, the CDR rune as well. So he's getting a lot of bonus from going Ionian boots into, full Sunfire, getting haste really early on. He's going to have a lot of power, and champs like Ornn as well, who rely on their spells, they're going to get a lot of value from this change. Now, as for the Randuin, I would say this item's in the exact same place even after this change. You build this item into multiple crit chance champs. So if they have Yasuo or Yone playing Fleet Yasuo or something, and they're building crit, or a Tristana mid, or Tryndamere top, this will be a great item for you because you can, of course, nullify the multiple crit chance champs. Now, as for Unending Despair, I would say this item is in a very similar spot to Fimbulwinter. It was pretty good with Ingenious Hunter if you're snowballing and you can make it work like that, but now, even though 2 seconds are reduced, you lose Ingenious Hunter. It's in pretty much the same spot, but you can take stronger runes, which is pretty good for that. I'd say you should only take this item on drain tank champions like a Zac. If you're doing quite well, you're snowballing, and you don't really need MR that badly, it can work, but generally it's not going to be as strong as items like Jaksho the Protein, stuff like that. Now, speaking of strong items, we have Abyssal Mask. In my opinion, this item is very underrated because of how cheap it is. If you're playing a tank champion or a tanky bruiser, that can build this item quite well, and you have multiple AP threats on your team, you should always be building it. If you have AP jungle and mid, you should be looking to build this item. Of course, don't build it on Fiora or Gwen or something. Actually, maybe Gwen can build it, but you don't build it on these hard carry top laners. But if you're playing a champ like Darius, you can build this as your third item. It's just so cheap, easy to get MR, and you can go Negatron Cloak as a early recall, get a big boost to MR, and this buff is quite nice, making it cheaper, making the AoE bigger, making the magic resist stronger against squishier targets. So really good change, I would say. And this item's very underrated, so feel free to buy it. But if you base, let's say you bought your Negatron Cloak and you base and you have enough for Juxtra the Protein as your third item, you should probably still go that. But this item's just so good because it's so cheap, it's very easy to pick up as a third item, especially before, a big Baron fight or a big Dragon fight, something along those lines. Now, as for Knight's Vow, you don't really build this in solo queue, it's more of a pro player tank item late game, and this change doesn't really change it. Zeke's useless item as well, so we'll start on the major items now. Blackfire Torch, the only champ I could really see building this would be Teemo and Singe, those real poisonous guys, and this could be quite good on them. I'm going to have to test it before I really lock it in, but this item combined with Leandri's can make those champs very oppressive, I would say. Now, as for Faded Ashes, this is what I'm most excited about for Rumble. This is such a good early spike for Rumble, and it just does so much damage. If you have Sork Boots in this item, 2k gold, and you verse everyone else with what, Sheen, Ruby Sword, or whatever else I can give a 2k, maybe Sheen Phage, you're going to be so much stronger than them. In your E, being able to burn them and proc Comet and Scorch, it's just way too much damage early game. I think he's going to be in such a good spot after this, even better than before. So it's going to be really good for an early pickup for top lane. And it builds into Leandri's as well, which makes that build path way nicer on champs like Rumble. And you could even build it, so we'll skip straight to Leandri's, you could even build this on champions like a Kali top, if you're into a tanky matchup. So let's say you're up against, some beefcake, like a full tank like Asante, and you're playing a Kali, this could be a great buy as well, and the Faded Ashes makes the build path a lot nicer. And as for Fighter's item, Overlord's Bloodmail is a pretty good item on champions that build Sterak second, I'd say, so as a third item. So say you're playing Set or Darius and you go Stridebreaker into Sterak, and this item is a third one. Really good spike for you, just make sure you're not buying it as a replacement for Resist when you need them. So if you're playing Darius and you go Stridebreaker Sterak and they have a heavy AP damage team, definitely need to get an MR item. You can't be egoing having resist and just having a ton of HP, especially if they have AP champs that can burn you, champs like Lilia, you really need to be building MR at that point. And I wouldn't say you need to build this over armor. Let's say you're versus an AD top, Tabbies is going to be enough in a lot of cases, but maybe, if you're versus Fiora, Kindred jungle, a strong ADC, of course, right, armor is going to be better than this item, but if you're in a game where you don't really feel like you need armor or MR, this can be a great third item combined with Sterak's. Now, as for Bork, I would say pretty similar position in terms of the champs it's good on. Champs like Aurelia, it's still going to be very strong, pretty much mandatory on that champ. The downside of this item now is the removal of lethal tempo actually affects it. So before, if you're playing a champ like Jax with lethal tempo, this could be a great second item in games where you have versus champs like Fiora or Gwen and you want to have as much side lane power as possible. But now I'd say that's not really an option. You don't want to be building Bork on Conqueror Jax. It doesn't feel as good. You still can in some games where the only win con is side lane, but it's definitely going to be a lot weaker than it was before with the removal of lethal tempo. And as for Black Cleaver, I would say pretty similar spot. It's a really small buff, but you're still going to be building this in the same location. So if you're playing Pantheon or a champ like Renekton who uses Black Cleaver quite well into a tank like a Cassante or an Ornn top, you can build this as your first item. Or even if you verse, a Squishy or Bruiser like an Aatrox, but they have a tank, a support or tank jungle, stuff like that, you can still build this as your second item. But generally this change is nice, but doesn't change the situation in which you're going to buy it. Now for boots, plated steel caps, I like this change. I like items being cheaper and a lot more accessible because it does feel bad on champs like Darius when you have to base early and you have D-Shield, Sword, Ruby, or Double Sword, where champs that really benefit from tier 2 boots. This is going to be a great change for them. So technically it is weaker, late game. Maybe that's what they were going for, to make ADCs feel better. But in terms of an early spike for 1v1 power, it does feel quite good. So especially if you can verse, if you do verse AD top jungle, and you can get 1k gold in your first recall, it's going to be a lot better. And also an unseen benefit is if you're winning your matchup, you can base one wave earlier. So if you're playing Darius and you're hard winning, you can base one wave earlier than you would do previously, and then you can come back to lane, that one wave faster and punish your opponent, especially when they're playing champs that don't spike as hard on tier 2s. So let's say you're playing Darius versus a Camille. maybe you do want to be rushing into the lane, not rushing into the lane, but speeding up the pace of the lane, basing that one wave earlier and making, the wave bounce back towards you, and then punishing you when you're tier 2 boots versus Sheen, something like that. Now, as for Symbiotic Souls, I would stay away from this item completely as top lane. I think it's quite terrible for top lane. It's pretty good in the other roles. For assassins and supports, it can work. But for top lane, it's not worth it. I've seen some strong side lane mains, York mains and stuff, experiment with the extra tempo, but it's not worth it. If you want the extra mobility, just go Swifty boots. But generally on top lane, you need tabbies or mercs, and it's definitely not worth sacrificing those for these boots. Now, as for the marksman items, of course, our marksmen get everything this patch. They get the biggest benefit. The champs are defects in top lane mainly. For Gangplank, he gets really screwed over with the removal of Essence Reaver having a Sheen proc. So he's most likely going to have to do the Triforce build again, which is not terrible, but of course, Essence Reaver was a big part of his strength, or, feeling good on him, so he's really going to miss that item. Now, as for the champion that benefits the most, in my opinion, from these changes, is going to be Garen, because we'll start with Phantom Dancer. This change is so good for Garen, more mobility, more attack speed, and the item's actually cheaper. And the highest ranked Garen one trick in Korea would actually go PD second. He did more of a crit Garen build, and that's going to be feeling extra strong for him on this patch. So I'm pretty sure he's going to push past his peak. We're going to have to wait and see, but this build is really going to benefit Garen, and also the ability to upgrade your tier 2 boots. So you can upgrade Berserker Greaves into Zephyr, which I wouldn't do it straight away at level 15. I do think the, key items are still more important, but, late into the game, once you start to get level 18, you're rounding off your build, or if you base with 2k gold before a big fight, something like that, it can be a big spike. Level 16, you base with 2k gold before a Baron fight, great spike for you. You can feel a lot stronger than just buying a BF sword or something along those lines. Now, as for the rest of the items, the half-bound exchange being more expensive, this item was terrible before, and it's still going to be terrible, so I'd stay away from it as in terms of a rush. And as for the rest of the items, don't really change top at all, so we're going to get started on the summoner spells. So we'll start with Ghost, and in my opinion, this is a pretty significant nerf. There are a lot of champions where you could greed, take Ghost, and sort of dual wield it. Champs like Mordekaiser, you could take Ghost Flash or Fiora or Jax even, if you're feeling, really confident in your matchup. But now you should definitely not do that. And a big benefit to Ghost that's pretty much removed now is the ability to desync it with your opponent's Flash. So let's say you're playing Olaf, where you take Approach Velocity and Ghost. You can burn their Flash with your Ghost, and then on your next Ghost cooldown, you have a 90-second window when they don't have Flash, which is a really long time for a laning phase to play for a solo kill. But now, especially if you've someone with Cosmic Insight, your advantage is completely removed, and also it being reduced from 15 to 10, it makes the spell a lot weaker. So I'd recommend not greeding it on, champions that don't necessarily need it, but on champs like Darius or Olaf where you pretty much just need the spell, you do need to take it. There could be some games where you don't. Let's say you're versing a full melee dive comp that's going to be running into you. Maybe you could take Ignite or TP, but generally those champs rely on Ghost so much, it's a key part of their kit, they can't really play without it. But on champs, that are more flexible, you could get away with not taking it anymore because it's just so weak, there's going to be better alternatives. Now, Cleanse will never take that. Exhaust, I actually did test this because I assumed maybe the 40% slow. I wanted to give it a try and see if it felt good, but it's still weak. I'd definitely avoid the spell, especially the higher cooldown. The only scenario you really take Exhaust in top lane is maybe Gwen into Kin, and TP Exhaust can feel quite good, or into Riven, but generally, the higher cooldown makes it feel a lot less impactful, and you don't actually feel the difference in slow, so it's still not going to be worth it in the end. Now, Heal and Barrier, we'll never take that, so we're going to jump straight down to the runes. Alright, so starting with the Domination tree, Predator summoning top laners would never take, and neither is Halo Blades. A side benefit, actually, from Halo Blades being nerfed, is you don't have to play with players not named T1 Courier trying to play champs like Ashe or Callisto support anymore. I would hope, if they can read, so that's a great change, thank you for that right, I do not want to see that anymore. But as for Ingenious Hunter, we already touched on it a little bit. It's going to affect the, the meme builds of Volibear with Unending Despair, stuff like that. But in my opinion, this rune was really good as a low elo stomping rune. It was really good to take Domination with Ingenious Hunter as your secondary. In matchups where you feel really confident, on champs where you build Eclipse and Sundered Sky, because just getting double reduced on those cooldowns gives your champion a lot more 1v9 potential, but it does come at the cost of some laning strength. But now that's removed, I would say it mainly just affects champions like Volibear, champs like Nasus that would take this rune in the past, with the Fimbulwinter type of Underneath Despair build. So I'd say it's a good change because I'm not a fan of those drain tanky cheesy type of builds in general. Now as for sudden impact, this rune was kind of sleeper OP. but I'm glad they nerfed it because top lane can't really take it. You can maybe greed it on champs like Jace or maybe even Riven in certain easy matchups, but generally it's not a top laner's rune of choice, so I'm pretty happy that they nerfed it because it gave you a bit too much extra damage in the early game. And as for Relentless Hunter, also a rune we wouldn't take, so I'm going to jump straight to Lethal Tempo. And this is probably the biggest change of the patch in terms of infecting the top lane meta, because so many champions that rely on this rune, champs like Yasuo, Yone, Tryndamere, you're probably not going to see very much anymore, but if you do, they're going to be significantly weaker. And also, something that I'm really struggling with right now is the removal of this for Jax in particular. Although Jax does have a lot of options, you can take Conqueror or Fleet or Grasp, depending on your matchup, there were a lot of lanes where you kind of rely on tempo. So two notable ones, Fiora and Alawi. So I'll mainly touch on Fiora, but you want to be having a lot of early game combat power in this matchup. So versus Fiora, you want to be playing for the 1 to 3 push, heavy trading onto her, taking extended trades, especially level 1, and she has to weigh you out, and then let the wave come back towards you and play for a kill. You want to be snowballing on her early game, playing really aggressive, and you could even take Ignite in that lane, but now with tempo removed, it's really hard to get a 3-wave crash against a very skilled Fiora, especially if they take Grasp. So I'd say the removal of this rune hurts a lot of Jax's difficult, really volatile matchups, like a Laui or Fiora, where you want to be playing very aggressive early game, but because he has so many options, he's going to be fine in general, just a slight nerf for him, but of course a huge nerf for champs that rely on this one. So Yone, a champ I always ranked, S or high A tier, really impacted by this rune. He's going to drop several tiers, and even, champs like Tryndamere and Yasuo are going to suffer as well. Now, as for PTA, in my opinion, this rune is overrated. I'm not a fan of it. The only time you take this rune are when you want to be taking short trades, so champs like Pantheon or Renekton versus Quinn or something, where you take a short trade and you disengage the trade, and then when they're low HP, you all in them. If you're fighting for longer than 6 seconds with PTA, probably just take Conqueror anyway. I don't think this really changes when you take the rune. Of course, there are some champs now where you don't have a choice, you probably do have to take it on with tempo being removed, but I'd say this isn't really the biggest buff in the world. It doesn't really change when I would take the rune or not. Now over here, I'm glad they removed this. It makes it a lot easier to verse champs like Vayne or Quinn that took this rune. Absorb Life. So initially when I read the concept of this rune before it came out, I assumed it'd be really good on side laners with no sustain. So champs like Gwen, champs like Darius, stuff like that. But in my opinion right now, until they buff it slightly, there's not much of a reason to take this over Presence of Mind. Presence is way too OP of a rune, and you really feel the lack of mana if you don't take it on champs like Gwen, where if you play a champ like Riven that doesn't have mana, Triumph is probably going to be better anyway. So I would say this rune, not the best right now, needs a bit more time. Maybe there are 1 or 2 champs that can use it well, but generally on, the most popular champs, the main ones, not a rune to take. Now, as for tenacity and haste, so tenacity being removed is painful for some, but really good for others. So, for example, it's quite painful for Darius. He's not the biggest haste user, but really likes tenacity because he needs time to get stacks up, and if he's getting CC'd, it makes it a lot harder. So, it's going to feel really hard in certain games, especially when you verse an AD top in side lane as well, and you don't want to be building Merc treads if they have CC in the rest of their comp. I'll say this is a pretty hard nerf for top lane in general. It makes it gives you a lot less 1v9 potential, I'd say, in certain games, but maybe you get more carry potential in other games by having extra haste. It really depends on your champion. So the champions that benefit a lot from this, I'd say 2 noticeable champs would be Aatrox and Jace. Jace in particular, they really benefit from this rune because they didn't use, of course, lifesteal or attack speed, and they didn't even use tenacity that well. Of course, Aatrox can use tenacity very well, but ability haste is great on that champ, and champs like Jace, maybe even a Grasp Camille, are going to use this rune quite well. I feel like champs like Jax and Darius are going to miss tenacity quite well, and even a champ like Olaf will really love haste, so it really depends on the champ you play if the change is good or not. Now, as for cut down, top lane, you don't really take this often. It doesn't change much. Maybe if you're playing range champs or, playing versus Kled, you'd still take cut down, and this change is quite nice, but generally it's not a rune for top lane. And as for fleet footwork, I'm actually a fan of this change. I think the rune is pretty annoying in its current state. I'm glad that they nerfed the heal and buffed the movement speed, because in my opinion, there's a big difference between how high elo players use fleet and the way, lower elo brackets do, because the best way to use fleet is to use it as if it's your 5th spell. Really time it at the right time. So say Jace is about to shock blast you, you can auto attack sidestep it, gangplank barrel, you can space it out like that, auto attacking somebody with fleet to get the extra healing. So a lot of high elo players use this rune quite well, especially on range tops, but in low elo I see people mainly using it as just the heal. They just keep hitting the wave off cooldown. They're not timing their fleet to dodge key spells or, timing their fleet to punish the opponent. So I'd say this change makes it a bit more skill intensive than it was before. And as for Font of Life, please never take this in top lane. Not going to be the, the 1v1 rune that we want. And now moving on to Inspiration. So initially I was quite excited, getting more options in the Inspiration tree, but I was pretty disappointed. This cashback rune, in my opinion, is pretty terrible. If you get your 2 items, so let's use Camille for example, Triforce and Hydra, 2 very expensive items, you get just under 400 gold back, which is basically a ruby crystal or a longsword or something like that. Not the biggest spike. The issue I have is free boots gives you 300 gold worth of boots and also extra movement speed. And when you buy your Triforce, you get 200 gold back. You're probably going to be buying free boots anyway if you have a bit of change. Well, not free boots, you're probably going to be buying boots anyway, so it doesn't change anything early game. In fact, you can get boots earlier, then you get your first item, the free boots if you're playing well. And as for your second item, 22 minutes Baron fight, you get an extra 200, get your longsword or something, not very impactful. The only time I see it being useful is, 3 to 4 items, but even at that point, I would say it's better to take, stronger laning runes and play for the advantage. Because maybe if you took Cosmic Insight instead, your 1 minute flash cooldown would have gotten you an extra kill and denied XP, denied CS, denied 400 gold, or, gained yourself 400 gold swing. It's better than this item anyway. So I'd say this item's quite terrible. I'm not a fan of it in top lane. I'd much rather take runes that give you more combat power. Now, DMAT's being removed doesn't affect us. Jack of all trades. Another rune I was kind of interested in, but in my opinion, this one is also terrible because the early haste, 1 haste per stack, you don't notice it at all, I'd say, and even the adaptive force. So the best example I can give, let's say you're playing Jax and you build Doran's Blade first. I recommend going D-Blade if you take this because you get the lifesteal, HP, and AD. So 3 stacks straight away, and then you base and you build Sheen and Dagger, or Sheen and Boots, right? So then you get your Adaptive Force. You get 6 AD at that point in the game, which is about half a longsword, just over around 175 gold with the stats. Definitely not worth sacrificing a stronger laning rune. So this item can be good on probably certain champs, and I like what they, how they explained it. A crazy build where you get 10 different components, but there's not many top lane champs that can do that. There are probably 1 or 2. We could get away with it, maybe Kale or something like that. But even in that case, if you're playing a champ like that, you probably want to have more combat power and play more for your lane advantage. Because any type of kill or advantage you get in your lane for using your, your combat power is going to be more than you get from these greedy runes. But if you feel like you're going to win lane anyway, or you just want to chill and do nothing in lane, maybe it depends on the matchup, maybe you can take these 2 greedy runes or, one of them. But generally, I'd say it's better for your development as a player to take the greedy laning runes, not greedy, the aggressive laning runes, and play more so for that advantage. Because especially now playing in Korea, it's made me realize just how important early game is. So if I'm taking these, weak scaling runes, it puts me at a disadvantage, and I also don't want you to be in that disadvantage. So moving on to Time Warp Tonic, I'd say this change doesn't affect it whatsoever, still going to be a trash rune. And if I had to pick the strongest runes in the Inspiration tree, Cosmic Insight by far, so powerful, and then Triple Tonic or Cookies. Now, Cookies third, Time Warp Tonic gives you that kill window on that first pot. It actually is really powerful. The second pot, the Adaptive Force one, and can lead to a lot of advantages. So if you take that Adaptive Force pot and you get a kill with it, or a really good trade, then make some base and you get a plate and deny a wave, something like that, it's already going to be better in most situations in all of these scaling runes. So definitely I recommend taking stronger runes like that. Now as for the first strike changes, I'm a big fan of this change. It felt quite bad early game, auto taking your opponent getting 6 or 7 gold, so I like that they upped the threshold a lot. I would still say you shouldn't take this rune over runes in matches where you need it. So to give an example of that, let's say you're playing Jace versus Camille, you need Conqueror, so that when she ults onto you, you have a lot of all-in threat, your trading is better, or if you versus Darius or an Olaf, you need Phase Rush. I wouldn't greed and take First Strike over those runes just because of this buff. It's not a big enough buff to warrant that. And let's say you're playing, Kennen, for example, you'd probably already be looking to take First Strike versus champs like Sion or champs like Ornn. It's going to work out quite well, or even like a Cassante, so that's not going to change that. There might be some matchups, maybe like a Renekton, you could greet it, something like that if you play very well. But even then, staying on topic, the stronger laning runes are going to feel better, and gaining an advantage over your opponent instead of just farming them for gold is going to be better in more situations. Alright everyone, I'm going to finish up there. Now I'm hoping this video helps and gives you some insight in some way on the new patch, especially if you're somebody like me who wants to be playing ranked straight away and testing everything out. Now I'm going to be making a tier list in a couple of days once I have a much better understanding of the patch, so look forward to that. And if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me down below, and if not, I'll see you guys next time.